Live, this is Steve Price.
Good evening, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us. Now, predictably, Victoria's worst ever Premier, Jacinta Allan, like her predecessor, Daniel Andrews, has jumped ship and taken off with a hefty pension, leaving behind the bin fire that is currently Victoria. I'll have more on that shortly. This at the end of a week federally where melons and delusion have dominated the political landscape, and a week the Prime Minister would rather forget. Just a little rosier overnight. Details in a moment. Imagine how relieved Anthony Albanese was when the hardline phone in his office rang last night and Donald Trump was on the other end. You could see the relief in his eyes at a hastily arranged media event at Parliament this morning, and literally could hear it in his voice. Yesterday's aluminium cash splash didn't move the dial, but the Japanese Prime Minister, surely Trump could move the dial. We'll have more on that shortly. Also coming up tonight on the program, in the middle of a debt crisis in Victoria and 3.5 months out from an election where government waste will play a major role in the outcome. This week alone, details in the Herald Sun reveal an astonishing $600,000 of taxpayers' money spent on coffee machines and coffee beans in one government department, plus $2.6 million over 10 years to rent pot plants. You can't make this stuff up. Shadow Attorney General James Newbury will join me shortly, and he'll rate Jacinta Allan's time in office. Plus, we catch up with the likely new member for Bendigo East, the MP from the Nats, Andrew Lethlean. Also tonight, a crisis in national health, in the national health system, and conditions in hospitals around the country have not improved since COVID and are about to get a lot worse after the federal government slashed private health insurance rebates for older Australians. Shadow Health Minister Anne Ruston on that, plus the waiting times for home aged care just get worse. Also tonight, both the government and the federal opposition seem frozen over reforms to gambling legislation, with divisions inside both parties on the changes. Are they too harsh or not harsh enough? But what impact would they have on the racing industry, especially the viability of country racing clubs to survive? Aaron Morrison, CEO of Racing Victoria, will explain. Plus, Friday regular Campbell Newman on the slump in the housing prices nationwide and his take on the Prime Minister's inability to say sorry. But first, we'll have a look in a moment at that $600,000 coffee contract paid by you and I and all those other Victorians, and we will speak to the Shadow Attorney General, as I said, James Newbury, in a moment. But first, to those student marches around the country yesterday and the attacks on Pauline Hanson. Now, the first thing to say about them is they would be like water off a duck's back for Hanson herself, but the hypocrisy and the juvenile ignorance those demonstrators shone a light on are frightening. The indoctrination of a generation of late high school and early university students was on display yesterday, and of course earlier this year in a series of pro-Palestine and anti-Israel marches that led to an explosion of anti-Semitism stoked by various radical socialist groups and university unions. Now, it appears that the same activists are now determined to turn their attention away from Gaza and start attacking Senator Pauline Hanson in a disgusting, aggressive campaign of abuse. Just for a moment, cast your eyes at some of the banners that were waved around by these juvenile dimwits yesterday. Hanson was called a racist bitch, a fascist, told to go to hell, and this nonsense comment from one of the organisers who said, "How can you have a normal day at school when you know a Pauline Hanson One Nation government could take power and deport half of your classmates? What garbage." I mean, the organiser went on to urge their protesting teenager mates that there was no time to be complacent. Now, I presume this young woman was referring to One Nation's pledge to crack down on student visa overstayers who are illegally in the country, illegally here benefiting from taxpayer-funded education. And if it is half that young woman's class, we have an even bigger problem than we realise. Now, as usual, a few Greens MPs hung around the edges of the Sydney rally, where incredibly, disturbingly, if this is actually reported, said, quote, Pauline Hanson's worst nightmare was the student crowd, and then directly referred according to The Australian today, to Pauline Hanson as a racist F. I mean, gee, that's intellectually adding to the debate, isn't it? Now, as One Nation Deputy Leader Barnaby Joyce said late yesterday, these kids were being indoctrinated.
They're not interested in politics. They're following instruction from a socialist clique that has basically given instruction. I don't think if you'd gone to those students 4 weeks ago and said, explain to me the policies of the Labor Party, the Greens, One Nation, in a proficient form, so much so that you would actually go on strike, I think you'd have much luck. What I do believe in is that a group of, I'll call it for what it is, socialist, left-leaning organisers have basically given inspiration and instruction to students to manifestly portray their political views.
While in Melbourne, to make matters worse, a masked coward, one of the protesters with a mask disguising his identity, snatched the News24 microphone off our reporter Georgie Dickinson, who had to chase down this weak moron to get the microphone back.
Similar sentiment to where Kaiser is in. Give it back! 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 Let it go! She stole my microphone, it's in her bag.
What a gutless fool. Wasn't even brave enough to show his face. I mean, and snatched the microphone out of a female reporter doing her job. And Georgie did a magnificent job. She did also access the intelligence of some of those that were actually in the crowd. What she got back is gobsmackingly frightening. Have a look.
Policies. I don't like what she says against immigration.
To stand up for what's right and show what kids want.
And what is that? What do kids want?
Freedom and more diversity.
We're here to say no to the fascist far-right policies of Pauline Hanson.
Protesting for what's right and, like, what's wrong with what she's doing.
Just how she acts and stuff. Like, as my sign says, she is racist, sexist and a Nazi. And just no one really wants that as a president. Or not president, like minister?
God help the future of this country if those people are going to be running it one day. I mean, not knowing the difference between a president and a prime minister, what are we teaching these kids at school? I mean, Hanson herself, she nailed it by suggesting we should be teaching children to think, not what to think. And as she said, if you want to protest, then march about the crippling cost of living, or march about the value of your parents' house going back, your inheritance disappearing. Of course, it's much easier and less intellectually difficult to run around supporting a deadly terrorist regime like Hamas or calling Pauline a racial fascist bitch. Of course, these lefty, indoctrinated uni students will become, some of them, the next draft of hard left socialist Labor recruits for the next generation of state and federal Labor members of Parliament. And sadly, come election time here in Victoria, expect more of this Pauline Hanson hate speech. It will be out of control. OK, staying with Victorian politics, where former Premier Jacinta Allen didn't surprise anyone today. She confirmed this morning what we've all been expecting. She is jumping ship, refusing to face the people in an election as the former Premier, and taking off with a lifetime pension. Some say as much as $300,000 a year. It could be more. Many Victorians, and she can have another job, by the way, many Victorians wanted her to stay so she could be booted out of her own seat. I'll talk after the break to the Nationals candidate for that seat, Andrew Lethlean. Joining me now is the Liberals Shadow Attorney General, James Newbury. Good to see you again. Are you surprised Jacinta jumped?
No, because she didn't want to face the people, did she? And as you said, she's heading out, probably costing Victoria more than any other minister or MP in history in terms of overseeing the $15 billion of corruption under her watch. And now we're paying for the pension for her. So though almost no members of parliament get a pension anymore, taxpayers are footing that bill too. And I think Victorians are pretty angry today, knowing, number one, she's not going to be held accountable. Number two, she cost us in terms of her lack of oversight over corruption. And now we're paying for her to have a lifelong pension of a reported $300,000 a year. Pretty rough trot, isn't it?
Well, James, I mean, it's reported today that she's going to take off overseas. Now, no one begrudges her going on doing whatever she wants once she's out of Parliament, but unless she caused a by-election, doesn't she have to stay in her seat and attend Parliament before the writs are given for the election to actually start?
Unless it's very shortly before an election, there is an exemption in those circumstances. By the way, she hasn't been in Parliament for the last couple of weeks before she made her announcement. So we were paying for that too. But, you know, just before an election, you can leave and there is no by-election requirement. I think the thing that's upset Victorians is the lack of accountability. I mean, there are just no consequences in this state anymore. There's no financial consequence. There's no, you know, consequence for what's happened under her watch. She's just jumped ship onto a really, really big pension, you know, a big cushion of a pension. And I think Victorians are saying, hang on, we've paid for all of this and now we're paying for it more. What's up with that? And they're very fair questions.
What will her legacy be?
I think she's got to be the worst premier we've ever had. Now, it's a hard competition against Dan. And I know I can hear your viewers right now throwing things at the TV and saying, what about Dan? The difference is $15 billion. I mean, Dan was shocking, you know, and, you know, it's probably about a 1%, you know, between the two of them. But this premier, under her watch, oversaw $15 billion of corrupted money in this state. And so I think and frankly, we've also seen a crime crisis, which has caused the most shocking instances of crime. I don't know if you saw it, but only a couple of weeks ago, poor trader across in Sunbury died as a result of a crime at his shop front.
Dreadful.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a shock. And, you know, most Victorians have heard about it and we're all heartbroken over it. This is the type of stuff that's happened under Jacinda Allen. So I reckon worst premier we've ever had.
One of the big issues this week, James, was the revelation that the states the states' corruption bodies have been stripped of many of their resources. Why would that be happening at a time when we've got so much corruption on the go?
Well, because when corruption's occurring, well, what does the Labor government do? They starve them of funds to stop them being able to investigate. I mean, it's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? I mean, Labor knows there's corruption and so their funding goes down. You know, when IBAC was looking into Daniel Andrews, guess what happened to IBAC's funding? It went down. Isn't that funny? I think we all know why that's the case. Funding for the organisation that processes freedom of information requests. Funding goes down. I mean, this is what's happening in Victoria. It is just so wrong, but there's hope. We've only got 3 months till an election. We get a fresh start. We can fix the state. And that's what we've got to do. It's time to fix this state.
Ben Carroll told me that integrity is non-negotiable.
Yeah, well, Ben Carroll's best mate, good mate, is heading the Education Department as Secretary, who was a key figure in last week's IBAC report. Ben Carroll hasn't sacked his good mate, has he? You know, his planning minister made a decision in relation to her property to exempt herself from an activity centre on the other side of the road, broke the ministerial code of conduct. She's still in her job. I tell you what, integrity is seriously optional in this government, and under Ben Carroll, nothing has changed. And I feel certain now that Victorians know it. You can feel it in Victoria when you talk to people. Labor hoped that if they changed the name at the top, that suddenly Victorians would be tricked. Well, Victorians aren't being tricked. Victorians know that this Labor government's rotten. The corruption is at the core of what's going on in this state government, and it is time for change.
Just quickly before you go, how do you spend $600,000 on coffee machines and coffee beans, which is one government department apparently has?
Yeah, and a couple of million on pot plants. You know, when you pay your
I
tax...
shouldn't laugh, really. I should
I know,
not laugh.
because it's yours.
It's a
It's
disgrace.
our money, isn't it, Steve? You know,
Correct.
I think Victorians are looking on, and I keep saying this to Ben Carroll, I keep saying it to the Labor ministers. Every dollar the government gets in its coffers was first earned by a taxpayer through blood, sweat and tears, right? Like, I mean, people have paid tax after working hard to get that money. And I mean, people's blood is boiling now in Victoria. They're seeing money being wasted on pot plants, coffee. I mean, it is, $15 billion of corruption. Let's not forget that little figure. Victorians have had enough. It's time for change. We've got to get financially responsible. We've got to have some respect for taxpayers' money. We've got to clean up corruption, and we've got to stop the crime. And we can do all that in 3 months. All
right, good on you. Good to see you again. James Newbury there. That election, of course, is now 3.5 months away. I want to talk federally now about the Albanese government. This idea that they're going to overhaul gambling and advertising. I mean, it's raising some pretty serious concerns across the racing industry, warnings that the reforms could put country race clubs under enormous financial pressure, if not even make them collapse. Here was the Prime Minister this morning talking about the gambling reforms.
What's your personal view on inducements as a tool for the gambling industry to keep people betting?
That they're over the top and they need to be wound back. That in particular, some of the inducements that will encourage people into the system are just not on.
Aaron Morrison's the Chief Executive of Racing Victoria and joins me now. Aaron, good to see you. I think we can all agree that these reforms are aimed at providing a safeguard to stop problem gambling, but you argue that restrictions could actually come as a cost to the regions. Tell us how that's going to impact.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Well, firstly, I should be clear, we absolutely support harm minimisation measures, particularly around vulnerable people and minors. And we understand that the target of the reforms is around those types of people. But we want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences for the racing industry, one of Australia's greatest industries. You know, we employ over 100,000 full-time equivalent roles. Most of those are in regional areas. And when you think about participants and volunteers and all the people connected, there's hundreds of thousands of people dependent on racing and communities that are dependent on racing. So there's real risk for real people, real jobs, real livelihoods and real communities at stake here if we get this wrong. You think about the people that enjoy a punt. You know, there's a couple of million people each and every week enjoying a punt responsibly within their means, and their activity basically funds the whole racing ecosystem. You know, they provide all of the funding for us. Something like 85–90% of our funding comes from wagering, and so we're keen to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences as these reforms come through for us.
Yeah, I think we all support, widely the need for action on problem gamblers, but it seems to be targeted at particular aspects of gambling. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest gambling problem in the country is poker machines, and no one's even talking about poker machine reform.
Absolutely, and it's a shame. But that's the case, Steve. Like, we would represent less than 10% of all gambling losses, and problem gambling incidents is very minor on wagering. As I said before, most people enjoy a punt. They enjoy the skill and the thrill of doing the form and studying the form, and they do so, and it brings great enjoyment to millions of people who enjoy that pastime responsibly and have done so for many generations. So I think there's a focus here that threatens to be too broad. I heard the Prime Minister before speaking about inducements, and that particular terminology I think refers to inducements to get people to come into the ecosystem, and they're potentially already banned, and there's an existing framework that should be being enforced to stop some of that undesirable behaviour. But we shouldn't be stopping what I would consider general customer promotions that are a reasonable part of any retail offering, wagering or otherwise. Bonus bets, money back specials, guaranteed odds, that's all part of a normal sort of consumer value add promotion. So, let's make sure that the blokes in the pubs on a Saturday don't have their normal bonus bets taken away and diminish the enjoyment of a product that they've enjoyed safely for many years.
Talking to Aaron Morrison from Racing Victoria, I think you've put some figures on, we could see 30% of turnover in the sport taken away if these reforms are too strict. What would that do to those country racing clubs that you talk about, which I think, if you look at it, Australians around the country have a great deal of love. There's a sort of romantic history to many of these country racing clubs, and it would be a dreadful change to our country if they all disappear.
Absolutely. I mean, there's such an important part of the culture and fabric of Australian society, and the country racing facilities are important community hubs and facilities. And they exist only with funding from racing authorities like us, and we get all of our revenue from wagering through product fees and taxes. We put on the show and deliver the funding to those regional communities. And they would be at risk if we saw a funding reduction in the magnitude of 30%. We don't have an alternative source of income just sitting on the sidelines. Any industry that's impacted to that magnitude would have to make some really tough decisions, and they could be the first at risk, and that would be a real shame, and they would be an unintended consequence, I think, of bad policy decisions.
The winter ball sports, rugby league and AFL in particular, are very good at lobbying politicians. Is the racing industry being listened to as well as to what this would do? And remind me again about how many people racing employ in this country.
Yeah, well, over 100,000 full-time equivalents, but in terms of people, roles, volunteers, participants, it's in the hundreds of thousands. So it's a very meaningful industry, one of the biggest industries in the state. We're very actively speaking with government. We're looking for differential treatment as the bill is progressed. It needs to recognise racing's sort of unique differences from sports. You talked about the ball sports before. And with sport in general, wagering's relatively incidental as part of the experience of watching sports. Wagering's not fundamental in the same way that it is for racing. It's part of the same product. It's actually inseparable. People engage with racing with the full expectation of receiving wagering offers and ads, and that needs to be acknowledged, and we need a differential treatment through the passage of this bill.
Aaron, good luck. We'll talk again. I agree with you. The racing industry needs to be looked after. All right, coming up after the break, the smoke and mirror tactics by federal Labor amid revelations that wait times for residential aged care continue to blow out. The Shadow Health Minister, Anne Ruston, will join us on the program next. Welcome back. Steve Price with you. In a moment, we will discuss those aged care bed wait times. It is something that every Australian should be concerned about because one day you're going to have to deal with it. Big news today, though. I mentioned at the top of the program, the Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen announced she will not contest her seat of Bendigo East at the state election, which is coming in November. And it's been reported this afternoon she's actually going to head off overseas, which is a little surprising. But what was not surprising is the fact that she is going to jump. It's a bit of a disappointment for her biggest critics who had probably hoped to boot her out from that seat in an election. Also disappointed, I suspect, the Nationals candidate for Bendigo, Andrew Lethlean. Good to see you again, Andrew. You wanted to take her on, didn't you? You wanted to actually have a fight it out to the end and beat her.
Oh, look, I think I did, but the challenge of obviously taking on the Premier was a huge task. But I guess with the federal swing we had the momentum, and we probably enjoyed the support we created from that federal seat. So it was just something, whether she was there or not, my focus was purely on winning the seat of Bendigo, because for us to get a change of government, that seat's pretty important.
I presume Jacinta's not having her farewell drinks at your pub tonight. That'd be fair to say?
Very fair to say, but in saying that, I have been in business for 28 years in Bendigo, and I honestly don't think she stepped foot in any of my venues. So I've never met Jacinta, and I've never actually had a discussion with her. I've said hello and goodbye in the polling booths, and that's about it.
On the way out, Andrew, she talked a lot about showing the children, the kids of Bendigo, that they could potentially become the Premier. I mean, I just saw that as typical spin. I mean, those same children were robbed of the chance to have a Commonwealth Games in Bendigo because their local member, Jacinta Allen, couldn't stand up to, or didn't want to stand up to Daniel Andrews, who cancelled them, and she was the Minister of the Games.
Yeah, I think it is definitely a lot of spin. I mean, we're realising that, I think she said in her first introductory speech that she was going to look after the regions, but our regions have been left behind. And now, our Bendigo being the second biggest town in regional Victoria, 25% of us live in the regions, yet we get about 12% of the funding. So this city-centric government has been letting down our regions too long. And whether she sat in Bendigo or not, she's let us down. So I want to make sure I've got a stronger voice for our regional towns.
She also took credit for the new hospital there. I mean, she was at the very pointy end of the government. She ended up being Premier. She was Deputy Premier and held very senior cabinet spots throughout her time. Was that fair enough that that hospital got built because of who she was as the local member?
I think if you look back into history, when the hospital was approved, it was a coalition government that approved it. So once again, there was a little bit of spin in there and they took credit for it. So.
Oh, funny that. Look, I mean, as Deputy Premier and Premier, the government is so city-focused. It's not funny. I mean, all of the money, and you must sit back as a resident of a large regional town and look at the waste of money on things like, Metro train, the SRL, the suburban rail loop, that thing on the Westgate Tunnel, which no one uses. I mean, it has poured money into suburban electorates. Daniel Andrews was a genius at it, Andrew, because he wanted to win those suburban seats.
Yeah, and I think when they came into government, I think it was about a $20 billion debt. Now we're heading towards $200 billion, and that's $11 billion a year in interest. I think when people realise that $11 billion is not being spent on police or hospitals or education or schools, it's being spent on interest alone. So it just goes to show that this government's so out of touch. It's certainly can't manage money. And, I want to make sure that, we bring back some honesty and some, a genuine person with some transparency and accountability in the seat of Bendigo East.
We asked the Liberals today whether they're going to stand a candidate in that seat up against you. They said, we don't know yet. What does that mean?
Once again, that'll be up to the Liberal side. I mean, I think, whether we're not sure what Labor's doing. We're not sure what One Nation's doing. So my focus will be purely on, going and meeting as many people, trying to prove to people that, we do need change and I'm the right person for the job, and whether we've got a Liberal candidate that supports us as part of the coalition. But, my focus will be definitely on, making sure, I can get over the line. So that's what I'll be targeting, knocking on more doors, doing more letterbox drops and doing the little things that, at the grassroots that we really, really missed out, probably federally, that I learnt.
Andrew, good to catch up again. Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it. Andrew Lettling there, the Nationals candidate for that Bendigo East seat. Now, I want to talk about this growing crisis in aged care. I've talked about this a lot on this program because of some personal issues with my own mother. New figures show Australians are waiting even longer to get the care they need. Anne Ruston is the Shadow Minister for Health and joins me now from Adelaide, my old hometown. Welcome to you. These wait time numbers, the average wait for a place in an aged care home, Anne's now climbed to 356 days. Thousands of Australians also waiting months for support services. It seems the government's plan to help older Australians stay in their own home is in complete disarray.
Look, absolutely. And we saw the figures this week. And, the thing that probably horrified me more than anything else is that the minister was out there crowing because there'd been a small drop in the wait times for home care packages. I mean, they're still disgusting. I mean, most people wait 10 or 12 months to get a home care package, but because they're dropped by a few days, the minister was out there crowing as if he'd done some great thing and older Australians were getting the care they needed when they needed it. It really is a tragedy because older Australians are paying the price for the incompetence of this government in aged care.
Yeah, I saw him up in question time with that answer to that Dorothy Dixer question, and Sam Ray's done an appalling job. He's been put in there, he's been given the hospital hand pass, and he can't seem to sort it out. I mean, the figures this week that you talk about, South Australia, the ACT, are waiting on average 317 days to get an in-home care package. I mean, that's almost 12 months.
Look, it is, and it is completely and utterly unacceptable. But, you know, Sam Ray's doing a terrible job. There's no question about that. But you sort of have to have a little tiny bit of sympathy for the person who got handed the aged care portfolio in a government that's declared war on older Australians. Because it's not just aged care. We've seen it with the private health insurance. We've seen it through some of the tax changes that they stuffed through the parliament in the last sitting fortnight, including, you know, capital gains tax on somebody who's just lost their wife, husband or partner. I mean, this is a government that quite clearly has declared war on older Australians, and they've stuck a minister with L plates in charge of aged care.
Yeah, I had the daughter of a man who was in his early 90s and had been classified as urgent to get an in-home care package, and he died waiting for it to happen. My own mother, which I've mentioned to you before, she turns 92 this year, wants to stay in her home. I sat down with her and had an assessment on the 18th of May. That's 13 weeks ago. She was told she was assessed as eligible for a medium package. Still waiting, hasn't been told. As soon as today, that she's been told today, it'll probably be another 6 months.
Yeah, and the government is hiding the figures about how many older Australians are dying waiting for their care after they've been assessed as needing care and then stuck on a wait list that goes on forever. And, you know, and when you're 92, being told that you've got to wait 6, 9, 12 months to be able to get access to care. I mean, when you're 92, 6, 9 and 12 months is a very long time.
This idea that the government cooked up, and Mark Butler came out and announced it just before the budget, that they were going to cut off the discounts on private health insurance for Australians over the age of 65 and over the age of 70, that is just one of the most ridiculous pieces of reform that I've ever heard of. All that is going to do is to force people on lower incomes out of private health insurance, back onto the public system, further crowding up the emergency departments in public hospitals.
Look, exactly, and I could probably speak for about 3 hours on all of the things that are wrong with this ill-conceived policy. You know, first of all, older Australians, many of whom have paid their private health insurance for, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, probably never really drawn on their private health insurance, are now coming to the age when not only does it provide them with security, they're more likely to draw on it. And so they're at the coalface of this terrible decision. But the bigger piece of this puzzle is the fact that the government's claiming it's intergenerational inequity. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth, because if you force older Australians who will draw on the health system more than younger Australians into the public system, it's taxpayers who pay for it, and it's other Australians who are going to, end up on longer wait lists for elective surgery. We're going to see more ramping. We're going to see more people, stranded patients in hospital because they won't be able to get the care that they need when they need it. So it is just the silliest policy in the whole world. And the reality is it's going to cost taxpayers more, not less. The government might be able to book a saving on the federal budget, but the state budgets will actually pay more in terms of costs, additional costs, than the savings that have been booked to the federal budget. So it is the silliest policy on every level, but the government's doubling down on it. So we hope that we'll convince the crossbench and the Greens about how bad this policy is, and maybe they'll vote it down with us.
Well, they'd be a disgrace if they didn't. I mean, there can be nothing more stressful than putting an elderly person who's desperately hanging on to their private health insurance because they want access to the system when they need a hip replacement or need urgent dental work. You put them through that stress and they're going to start dropping things that they would otherwise treasure. They'll stop, eating. People will stop eating to keep their private health insurance. They'll go without a meal, or they'll turn the lights off in the house. I mean, this is just... Why does this government believe it has to attack older Australians who paid their way all their lives?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and we should be asking the government that. But when we asked in estimates, this government is actually relying on the fact that older Australians will be so distressed and so anxious about their private health insurance that they will try and keep it by any means possible. And that could mean don't turn the heater on in winter, don't turn the air conditioner on in summer, don't go out for that meal that keeps them connected to the community. I mean, it is just incredible that a government would actually rely on the anxiety of older Australians not dropping their private health insurance so that they can actually take the money away from them. I mean, this government has got a lot of explaining to do about why it is constantly attacking older Australians. As I said, it's not just this private health insurance piece, it's across the board. This government appears to have declared war on older Australians.
We'll watch the passage of that bill with great interest. Anne Ruston, thank you very much for joining us from Adelaide tonight. Now, coming up after the break, more news of the day, including the reaction to those student protests that I talked about earlier. More news of the day, including the reaction to those protests, plus the Nationals leader Matt Canavan's call for a comprehensive audit of Australia's international treaties. That's up next. Welcome back. Steve Price with you. Rowan Dean coming up at the top of the hour. I want to turn attention to the concerns about the housing market. I mean, Labor's tax changes in that budget, high interest rates, smashing confidence right around the country. I mean, we're on the brink here of a housing price collapse. Some senior economists say that the property slump of more than 15% could actually trigger a recession. Others say we're already in one. It feels like it, doesn't it? Friday night regular former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman joins us. Great to see you again, Campbell. I'll get to the property market in a moment, but you were a Premier of one of the states outside the two big states in New South Wales and Victoria. I want to know what you made of the WA Premier's comments about the eastern states earlier today. Have a look at Premier Cook and what he has to say.
It's a sign that these East Coast clowns simply do not understand Western Australia.
I tried to do some work on radio in WA one time, and I made a dreadful mistake, and I regretted it ever since by replacing someone, and they all said behind my back, this bloke's from Melbourne, he wouldn't know what he's doing. You Queenslanders and the West Australians and my family in South Australia, they think Victoria and New South Wales are another nation.
They have said, well, we do, particularly Victoria these days. Sorry, mate. But look, I went through the army training years ago with a quite a vibrant group of young WA guys, and I learnt at a very early age that WA's got the best beaches, the best pubs, the greatest girls, you name it. It's fantastic. And good on them, and they do tend to get a bad deal on the GST, and that's why I think they're right to carry on about the need for the underpinning of that money coming back to them. I support them on that.
Yeah, my sister runs a business in WA, has so for about 40 years. She thinks we're all, common criminals on this side of the country. I want to talk real estate and house prices and what's going on in the real estate market. You have business in property. How bad is it out there, and how much of an impact has these capital gains tax changes and negative gearing changes had on the market?
Steve, it's very clear that it's the government's budget and their tax changes that have done this. It hasn't happened for any other reason. They have put a wrecking ball through the residential property market, and it's really quite disturbing to see the PM and ministers sort of sweep this away, though it doesn't matter. It does matter. We know that for almost all Australians, the single most important asset that they'll ever own is their own home. There are people out there who have bought in only the last year or two, particularly young people, young couples, for example, who now are underwater. In other words, they owe more than the property is worth. That is no laughing matter, and that ultimately has repercussions. I mean, banks, do have covenants on loans that they require people to have, a loan valuation ratio that doesn't rise above a certain level. And, the banks will be looking, well, how do we manage this? That is quite different from people's ability to pay the interest. So, it's not a good thing. The economists are saying that it can lead to recession because it's what they call the wealth effect applies. When prices are going backwards, people feel that they have to pull in their belts, they stop spending, they conserve their cash, and that then has a ripple effect or perhaps a tidal wave effect through the economy. So it's quite serious, and the government have caused this problem.
Look, the political connivance in all of this is really annoying. I said this on Shari the other night. If there had been an election coming up, you know, this year, they would no more have done that in the budget than Whistle Dixie. I mean, because the election's 2 years away, they somehow have convinced themselves, and Treasury has convinced them, oh, you can do it now because you won't have to in 2 years' time fight an election knowing that you smashed the value of someone's house.
That perhaps is the way they were thinking, but really where they're heading now is that they could well be a Labor government trying to get re-elected in hopefully the tail end of a downturn, the first downturn for over 30 years. Try getting re-elected when you have presided over the creation of a recession, Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese. I mean, that's really where they're going. So, you know, it's quite extraordinary that they won't reconsider what they've done. A Peter Beattie, for example, would have been backtracking by now and apologising and reversing policy.
Matt Canavan today, just before you go, he's calling for a full audit of more than 4,000 international treaties which we're signed up to. What comes out of that from me is, what? We're signing up to 4,000 treaties? Surely not.
Look, there are a myriad of treaties that we've never heard of. And what that means, just to explain to people, is that you have, for example, a treaty that might be to do with the environment. And that then means that the federal government can create federal environmental legislation, as they did back around 1997, which then sort of says, well, we signed that international treaty, therefore, under the Commonwealth's external affairs power, we're allowed then to create legislation that overrides the states and has an environmental power that allows them to then dictate what goes on across Australia in a way that the founding fathers never actually envisaged. And so that means we've got some terrible legislation.
Unbelievable.
The environmental legislation in this country stops progress. It stops development, the economic development of Australia. That's just one example. There are so many more. I mean, you know, affecting finance, the economy, you know, social affairs, human rights. There's all sorts of things, and I think it's a really good suggestion by Canavan.
Yeah, what I must do is get a list of that. I'd be fascinating to read through the 4,000. Campbell, always good to see you, my friend. I'll see you next Friday night. Coming up after the break, the panel will join us. Friday night panel, some decisions out of Victoria I've got to put to them. Welcome back, Friday Night Panel Time. News24 contributors, the great Joe Hildebrand in Sydney and Christy McSweeney joins us in Melbourne. Welcome to you both.
Yes, sir.
Now, we touched on this earlier. What do you make of this decision out of Victoria? One government department, funded by Treasury, dropped $600,000 on, what, hospital beds or new police or, you know, maybe some new trams? No. Coffee machines and coffee beans for one agency. Joe, seriously, is that the worst example of government waste you've ever seen?
It's obviously pretty crazy. I mean, the number obviously on its own is not a huge number, but for me, I think it's like the brown M&Ms that Van Halen famously demanded in all their contract riders. It wasn't the brown M&Ms that were important, but if people were missing that, then what else were they missing out on? And so if the government is dropping that sort of money on coffee and coffee machines and pot plants and whatever it is, these stories seem to pop up all the time. It just shows you the attitude that the previous government had to money, and it's why I think Ben Carroll is saying we are going to treat every single taxpayer dollar as though it is special, as though it is precious. And it is not our money.
Christy, they didn't even buy the pot plants, they were renting them. And look, I know someone who works at the ABC, far from me to defend the ABC, but at the ABC in Melbourne, they don't even have tea bags or coffee or milk for the staff, and yet on this department in Victoria, in Melbourne, they must have been buying them barista-style coffee machines.
Well, Steve, I don't know who's drinking this coffee because, of course, everybody is on unlimited work from home and flex time, let alone
Of course.
$1.6 million worth of pot plants that nobody ever goes to the office to water. And perhaps if 2 people of every department agency ever do go to work, they may want coffee because they'll probably find that the coffee shop, the small business that they used to go to, has closed down because the city is deserted because of this work from home doctrine of the Victorian Labor government.
As usual, you've nailed it completely, absolutely nailed it. That's quite true. A lot of coffee shops have gone broke in Melbourne. Now, this story that won't go away, I know Joe loves this story as much as I do. The melon controversy. Here was Julian Hill on ABC yesterday, on ABC Breakfast, defending the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister apologised weeks ago.
Was it for that as well?
But you can't apologise for something that didn't happen.
Well, but,
right?
but people have seen it and they think it happened.
We're going around in circles and it's completely fanciful and made up.
All right, people can watch it and decide if it's made up.
Absolutely, and they can watch all of us.
And many have watched it and don't think it's made up. That's
doing
the problem.
all sorts of hand gestures out of habit repeatedly. Like, this is what people do who talk with their hands, as I do. Like, honestly, the allegation, the suggestion is fanciful, it's ridiculous.
Hey, Joe, the hand thing.
The hand thing.
I mean, even Anthony Albanese today said,
now.
"Oh, I've done a lot of interviews, you know, and I sit in a chair and I have my hand." So someone in the Prime Minister's office has actually said, "Now, boss, the way we can get out of this, just get the ministers to go out there and say you do a lot of this with your hands." I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, it's staggering to think that this was actually 6 weeks ago that the podcast was came out. No one noticed for a couple of days, and then suddenly someone was obviously listening to it, just combing through it for something to use against the PM, because I don't think anyone genuinely offended would be listening to a podcast called Bush Deep. But I think the true outrage here is the hypocrisy. I don't think the PM did anything particularly offensive. Nobody died. You know, most of the all the nudge, wink, wink stuff was actually said by the comedian hosting it, and he just sort of chuckled and laughed along. And
okay.
Maybe there are a few...
On that point, Christy, you advised people about a whole bunch of things. Would you have let the person you're advising, in this case the Prime Minister, go and do that in the lodge? Did you see what that comedian, as what she's described as, was wearing? I mean, she's gone in there to suck him into saying these things.
Well, she is a comedian. That's her character. And good on Nikki Osborne. She nailed it. She has got the absolute scoop of the decade for comedians, endless comedians who have tried to trip up politicians. Yeah. She has nailed it. And can I say, that clip of Julian Hill there, it's Labor now seriously trying to say to the women of Australia, it didn't happen. It's made up. There's one thing the women of Australia have cottoned onto if they follow Instagram, which is what the Prime Minister was trying to tap into here, is gaslighting. That is a gaslight. We saw it, we watched it, and Labor is now trying to say to the women of Australia, it didn't happen. Poor old Tanya Plibersek must be coughing up her coffee every time she has to go out and
she can't stand Albo anyway. Joe, that when Albo found out that Donald Trump was calling him in the middle of the night, he must have gone, "You beauty, melons will disappear. I've got Trump."
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was one of those things where, hey, wake up! You won't believe who's on the phone. Obviously, it would have been planned for many weeks in advance, but it is a good circuit breaker for the PM. And again, frankly, I think we should all lighten up and just relax about the Melon Gate. And I think it's a problem that the left has been so easy to outrage in the past that he can't do that. But it does sort of highlight how many more serious issues there are that we need to be focused on.
And that's what we need to concentrate on.
You know, the Strait of Hormuz is still a massive problem. The tariffs,
correct,
goes on.
But the good news we've had today, both of you, is the fact Jacinda Allen's resigned as Premier of Victoria. She's going out on a $300,000 pension and going overseas on a holiday. Thank you both for joining us. Rowan Dean is up next.